Hello viewers. Today let us discuss the topic Election Commission and the political process in India. The preamble to the Constitution of India describes India as a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. At the heart of such a commitment lies the democratization of the society as well as the need to create a free, fair and regular electoral system. Now, this commitment to hold regular, fair elections lies in the hands of the Election Commission. Today, let us see how the Election Commission has performed its functions over the last few decades in ensuring a transparent democratic system in India. In order to facilitate better understanding of this topic, I have divided the entire discussion into a number of segments. We start with the basic question, why did the Constituent Assembly focus for a separate provision on elections? Second, we would move on to the composition of the Election Commission. Third, the powers and functions of the Election Commission. And then we would focus on electoral reforms and the role of the Election Commission in implementing electoral reforms. Now, before we begin with the composition of the Election Commission and the role of the Election Commission, it is imperative to understand that democratization entails an election system which provides people the right to elect their own representatives. Now, this process of democratization entails people's participation in a vast democracy like India. Elections cannot be held at one go. So, we have different elections to the Lok Sabha, which is the national legislature of popularly elected representatives, as well as the Vidhan Sabha with the state legislative representatives. Now, here we need the wholehearted participation of political parties as well as the entire electoral system. One important thing to note, students, is that good elections are impossible without effective electoral governance. The Constitution of India provides elaborate provisions for the institutionalization of an election commission in order to further the cause of democratization in India. Indeed, the architects of the Indian Constitution, that is the Constituent Assembly, felt it imperative to deliberate and create a centralized machinery for conducting elections which would be free from executive and legislative control in the interest of creating a democratic citizenship. Unlike USA, where the entire task of conducting elections is left to the legislatures, we in India have an independent election commission to conduct elections. The Constituent Assembly, when they started upon the stupendous task of deciding the electoral machinery, they had no colonial election legacy to follow, because during the colonial times, the British government had left the task of conducting elections to the national and provincial legislatures, to the legislatures themselves. The Constituent Assembly was thus faced with the very arduous task of creating a body which would be autonomous, powerful, yet not dictatorial. After much deliberations, it was decided to have a centralized election machinery independent of executive control. I would like to quote B.R. Ambedkar's views in this context. He opined, there were two alternatives before the drafting committee, namely, either to have a permanent body consisting of 4 or 5 members of the Election Commission who would continue in office throughout without any break, or to permit the President to have an ad hoc body appointed at the time when there is an election on the anvil. Now, the committee steered a middle course. What the committee, the drafting committee, proposed that there would permanently be in office one man called the Chief Election Commissioner, so that the skeleton machinery would always be available to conduct elections. Elections, no doubt, would take place at the end of 5 years, but there was this question, namely that a by-election may take place at any time. So, how do we conduct those by-elections? The assembly may be dissolved before the completion of the tenure of 5 years. And consequently, electoral rolls in a vast country like India will have to be kept updated. Therefore, it was believed that we need to have a permanent election system in place, and therefore, one Chief Election Commissioner will be there always in office when elections are coming up, and the President of India may be empowered to add up to the machinery by appointing other members to the Election Commission. So basically, when India embarked upon the democratic journey, we had just one Chief Election Commissioner to start off with the electoral process. Let us now move on to part 15 of the Constitution of India, which provides for elections. Article 324 clause 1 provides that the superintendent's direction and control of the preparation of electoral rolls for and the conduct of all elections to the parliament and to the legislature of every state and elections to the offices of the president and vice president held under this constitution shall be vested in a commission referred to in this constitution as the election commission. So clearly it was provided election commission would be constituted through the constitution. Article 324 clause 2 provides that the election commission shall consist of a chief election commissioner and such other number of election commissioners, if any, at the president may time to time fix, and the appointment of the chief election commissioner and other election commissioners shall, subject to the provisions of any law made in that behalf by parliament, be made by the president. So the president was empowered to appoint other election commissioners. Article 324 clause 3 provided that when any other election commissioner is so appointed, the chief election commissioner shall act as the chairman of the election commission. Article 324 also provided for superintendent's direction and control in this office. Thus, the framers debated at length on the composition of the election commission, and they provided for one member body to be assisted in the conduct of election. Now, this was a position in 1950. Later on, numerous committees were set up to find out whether we can bring about some changes in the composition of the election commission. Some of these committees were the Joint Parliamentary Committee on the Reform of Electoral Laws 1972, Tarkunde Committee on Electoral Reforms 1975, Goswami Committee 1990. They suggested the expansion of the election commission. In 1991, the Supreme Court held that the CEC deserves a higher degree of protection because he is a permanent incumbent of the Election Commission. Coupled with this, we had the 1993 ordinance for a 3-member commission, apparently to clip the wings of the then very active Chief Election Commission, T.N. Session. We will come to this a little later. Now, please note, students, that the composition of the Election Commission has been subjected to controversies from time to time. Till 1989, we had one Chief Election Commissioner who was in charge of conducting elections. In 1989, what happened? 2 other commissioners were appointed by the then Rajiv Gandhi government. The next year, when the Janata Party came to power, it revoked it to a single member election commission. However, this was not all. In October 1993, a presidential ordinance was passed which provided for a multi-member election commission and laid down the relationship between the Chief Election Commissioner and the other election commissioners. Presently, the Election Commission consists of 1 Chief Election Commissioners and 2 other election commissioners. Please note, students, that the 3 election commissioners enjoy co-equal powers, and it has been provided that decisions between the 3 election commissioners should be based on unanimity. The CEC and other election commissioners enjoy a term of 6 years and they remain in office till the age of 65 years. They are all appointed by the President of India. Now, in order to ensure that the Election Commission is an impartial body, the Constitution provides for some machinery, some mechanisms in order to maintain the independence of the Commission. This is to ensure that the election commissioners are guarded from the whims and fancies of the executive and the legislative wings of the government. Now, in order to protect the independence of the election commissioners, the process of removal of the election commissioners have been made very, very stringent. In fact, the procedure for removal of the election commissioners is on the same lines and equally tough like the procedure for removal of the judges of the Supreme Court and High Court. This procedure is called impeachment, and it has been provided that the election commissioners can be removed from office on grounds of incapacity and the fact that they have proved misbehavior. Other than that, they cannot be removed. It was intentionally made tough so that their tenure is not dependent on partisan control or executive control. The constitutional provisions pertaining to the Election Commission were an innovative response to the desire to have a democratic process that was institutionally entrenched and would be completely free from any form of government interference. After studying the independence of the Election Commission, let us try to understand what are the functions that they perform as per their constitutional obligations. If you just closely observe Article 324 Clause 1, which says that the power of superintendence, direction and control pertaining to elections is vested in the Election Commission. So, entire task of monitoring elections is with them. Now, the functions of the Election Commission are specifically preparation of electoral rolls for the elections to the Parliament and all the state legislatures, conducting elections to the offices of the President, Vice President, Union and state legislatures, allotting symbols to political parties, announcing the dates and times of elections, advising the President and the Governor as the case may be for requisitioning staff necessary for conducting elections, advising the President regarding disqualification of a member of Parliament and advising the Governor regarding disqualification of the member of the State Legislative Assembly, preparing the model code of conduct and ensuring that parties and candidates abide by them, preparation of order for central broadcast and telecast and allocation of dates and time to different political parties. These have been the traditional functions of the Election Commission since the 1950s. However, what is unique is that since 1990s, the Election Commission has embarked upon a process of cleansing the defects in the Indian electoral system. The 1990s is considered to be a landmark in the history of Indian election system. Since the 1990s, the Election Commission started the process of cleansing the defects of the Indian elections. They started off with the task of updating voters' registration, solving of problems of impersonation of voters as well as various electoral corruptions which had seeped into the Indian election machinery. The Election Commission attempted to simplify the cumbersome process of ballot system with electronic voting machines, EVMs as we popularly know. It started off as experiments with various state level legislative assembly elections, and gradually by 2003 all elections in the country started off with the EVM machines. Now, at this juncture we need to ask a question: how have the traditional functions of the Election Commission changed with the introduction of the multi-party coalition governments both at the center as well as in some of the states of the country? Undoubtedly, with more political parties in the political fray after the 1990s, Election Commission has become overburdened with coordinating and keeping a record of the candidates as well as the parties contesting elections. Till 1971, national and state level elections were held simultaneously. After the snap parliamentary elections called by Mrs. Indira Gandhi, national and state elections no longer coincided. Now started the difficult problem of holding different elections to different state legislatures as well as different Lok Sabha elections. Therefore, today the superintendence and conduct of elections is almost a regular affair, since we have elections more often than the usual 5-year tenure. This was contrary to what was envisaged by the architects of the Indian Constitution, and thus left with the Election Commission was left with just a handful of staff to conduct elections, which becomes an arduous problem during the time of conducting state level elections. Now, before we move on to electoral reforms, which is a very important part of the entire task of the Election Commission in cleansing the electoral process, let us take a quick glance about how the Indian electoral process is conducted. And this entire task is divided into 10 steps, and the Election Commission has been actively involved in all these 10 steps in order to ensure that there is complete transparency in the holding of elections at all levels of the government. We start off the electoral process with delimitation of constituencies after every census operation is conducted, that is at the end of 10 years, where boundaries of constituencies are demarcated. After this is the preparation of the electoral rolls for the elections, introduction of new voters, Then we have notification of elections and appointment of returning officers, followed by the filing of nomination papers, then the scrutiny of nomination papers, and then a particular day is assigned for withdrawal of nominations by candidates. The seventh step is the election campaign. The election campaign is followed by polling of votes, counting of votes and declaration of results, and finally it ends with settlement of disputes, if any. This is in a nutshell the entire electoral process in India. Simple it may sound, this entire procedure is cumbersome, complicated, not because of the diversity of the country, but because of the location of polling booths as well as the huge operation and responsibility it entails on the Election Commission. We have heard a lot about corruption in elections. In order to cleanse the election system from 1919, T.N. Session and the later election commissioners embarked upon a process of cleansing the election process from the very maladies and corruptions which had inflicted deep into the election process. Booth capturing, rigging, false voting, to name a few, had become a very common problem in the election process. Now, in order to bring about certain reforms in the election process, a number of committees had been formed. We had the Tarkunde Committee on Electoral Reform set up in 1975, the Goswami Committee of 1990, the National Commission to Review the Working of the Constitution 2000. All of them suggested certain measures to remove the defects in the election system. However, the most significant contribution of the Election Commission and its impact on electoral politics have been felt after the 1990s through the drafting and endorsement of a model code of conduct, and it should be lauded for cleansing some of the dirty electoral tactics which have been used by political parties to lure and tempt voters. Even without legal sanction, this code has emerged as a powerful weapon in the hands of the Election Commission to tame the errant politicians and their muscle men. So, it is high time we know what is this model code of conduct. The model code of conduct lays down the general conduct of political parties and candidates. In simple terms, these are the broad do's and don'ts to be observed once the election system is in place. Now, some of the model code of conduct may be: no party or candidate shall include in any activity which may aggravate existing differences or create mutual hatred or cause tension between different castes and communities, religious or linguistic. Another important model code of conduct is that the parties and candidates should refrain from criticizing the private lives of rival candidates, which is usually very common. Parties shall avoid corrupt practices like bribing of voters, intimidation of voters, impersonation of voters, canvassing within 100 meters of polling stations, holding public meetings during the period of 48 hours ending with the hour fixed for the close of the poll, and the transport and conveyance of voters to and from polling stations. This is not allowed. The party in power shall not use its official position for election campaign. Ministers shall not combine their official visit with electioneering work and shall not make use of official machinery at their disposal for electioneering work. Government transport, including official vehicles, machinery or personnel, shall not be used for the furtherance of the interest of the party in power. Public places such as maidans, helipad grounds, etc. for holding election meetings shall not be monopolized by the party in power. Other parties and candidates shall be allowed to use such places and facilities on the same terms and conditions on which they are used by the party in power. Advertisements shall not be issued during election period at the cost of the public exchequer, highlighting the achievements of the party in power. Once the election dates are announced, ministers and other authorities shall not make any ad hoc appointments in their respective ministries. Another very pertinent point is the disclosure of information by candidates. Let the voters know about the candidates. Let the voters know whom they are voting for. In order to create transparency in the voting system, the Election Commission has clearly provided that while filing nomination papers, every candidate has to fill in certain information regarding their educational qualifications, financial assets, as well as criminal antecedents, if any. This information is made public so that the voters come to know clearly about the candidates whom they will be choosing as their representative from the constituency. Some other electoral reforms include introduction of a comprehensive photo electoral roll and deduplication technologies help to eliminate bogus and duplicate voters. The conversion from ballot papers to electronic voting machines is also another landmark reform introduced by the Election Commission. It is lauded as a simple, quick and effective technique to ensure votes are cast as the minimum possible time. It has also eliminated many logistical problems earlier associated with the physical ballot papers. To make it user-friendly, in the 2016 West Bengal Vidhan Sabha elections, the EVM machines introduced the photograph of candidates beside the symbol and name to enable the voters to identify their candidates easily. This was a very interesting move. The EC continuously creates awareness among the voters by disseminating important poll-related information through the print and electronic media. The EC has also developed a very effective, transparent online communication system which is called COMET, C-O-M-E-T, to monitor every polling booth on the day of election. It has also developed a very effective software called STEERS, which means State Enhanced Electoral Roll System, to prevention duplication of voters list and eliminate wrong addresses. This software has also been very effective in doing away and excluding voters who have got their citizenship cards, as well as also voters who have died during the process of upgradation of the electoral rolls. So, all forms of deduplication of voters have been done away with through this particular software. Booth level officers are appointed and posted in every polling stations. Observers are supplemented by micro observers to keep polls transparent. Another interesting system that has been created by the Election Commission is the vulnerability mapping system. This system entails the identification of violence-prone constituencies and zones, and where special observers are sent and special security personnel are posted in order to ensure that violence pertaining to polls could be minimized. Regulating electoral expenses is also another electoral reform instituted by the Election Commission. In order to prevent massive misuse of public and private funds during election time, the Election Commission has put a limit to electoral expenses. What is especially noteworthy is that the candidates also need to provide assets owned by their spouses and children and other dependents along with the annual income and tax returns. The candidate's spouse and children have been brought under the scanner, as there is a tendency to route money to their family members' accounts to avoid EC scrutiny. Persons with a criminal background are a part of the Indian election system, and the Election Commission has been trying to create awareness so that the parties do not give tickets to candidates with a criminal background. Information furnished to the public through the Election Commission also helps them to generate mass public awareness. Let us move on to the next major electoral reform, that is NOTA, none of the above. NOTA gives voters the right to reject all the candidates if all of them are found suitable in a particular constituency. Please note, students, this is a major institutional reform in the sense that in the event of mass scale dissatisfaction by the voters over the lack of suitable candidates in some constituencies and helplessness of the voters in having to vote for any one candidate, the Election Commission in the 2014 Lok Sabha elections had introduced for the first time in the EVM machine the right to click on NOTA if no candidate is found suitable. The proposal to include NOTA was first mooted by the 170th Law Commission report in 1999 as part of the alternative method of election. Later in 2001 and 2004, the Election Commission of India proposed a similar concept of negative vote in their proposed electoral system. In a PIL filed by the People's Union of Civil Liberties, the Supreme Court pronounced that NOTA would empower the people and aid effective participation of the citizens in the electoral process. Please note, students, in 2014 Lok Sabha elections, 1.1% of the total votes were cast in favor of Nota. Let us finally move on to electoral offences. What constitutes an election offence? Promoting enmity between classes on grounds of religion, race, community and language is an electoral offence. Violation of the secrecy of vote. Convening, holding, alternating between public meetings and attending those public meetings within 48 hours before the end of the poll. Causing disturbance in public meetings, canvassing within 100 meters of the polling station on the day of the poll, booth capturing constitutes another election offence. How do we assess the role of the Election Commission in the last few decades, especially after 1990s? In the last 2 decades, we have seen a very strong presence of the Election Commission and the increasing trust and reliance on the election machinery by the voters. We need to appreciate the wholehearted role of the Election Commission in cleansing the otherwise corrupt Indian election system. Much has been achieved and much remains to be done. Having made a modest beginning in 1950 with no political antecedent, the Election Commission has over the years been regarded as an effective machinery in the conduct of elections to the various offices of the centre and the state. There was a major significant shift and working of the Election Commission, so much as the tenure of T.N. Session has been regarded as a watershed in the history of the Election Commission. Undoubtedly, the Election Commission dominating the post-1990s in terms of maintaining strict vigilance over political parties, especially the party in power where elections are being held, by removing or transferring partisan corrupt election officers in the interest of fair polls. We need to understand that the Election Commission has been playing a commendable role in cleansing the Indian election system. At the end, we can say that the EC has become an important constitutional machinery and we need to appreciate its role. Over the years, sophisticated planning reforms introduced by the Election Commission has led to improved security and more peaceful conduct of polling of the EC. It can thus be safely concluded that the Election Commission has played a commendable and a significant role in the consolidation of Indian democracy. Thank you.